God, land, and people. Ancient Near Eastern views of gods varied. They were surely as different as the views of God in today's world. However, across several ancient Near Eastern cultures and societies, there were some generally held conceptions of God. One such conception involves the relationship between God, land, and people. Ancient Near Eastern gods were often linked to a specific territory. It was not uncommon for a specific god to specialize in a particular aspect of life, whether that be fertility or war. Gods were not all powerful, nor were they necessarily capable of handling all aspects of life in the world. As such, ancient Near Easterners who understood that they were dependent on the gods for their existence and flourishing were not usually prone to worship a single god. They worshiped multiple gods, with multiple specialties in multiple arenas of life in order to ensure their security overall. In addition, because ancient Near Eastern gods were silent, those in the ancient Near East were essentially involved in an elaborate guessing game. Those in the ancient Near East looked to priests to help them hear the gods, kings to shepherd them as the representative of the gods on earth, and used their particular situation as a barometer for how pleased the gods actually were. Famine, defeat in battle, barrenness, and other things were seen as signs that the gods were somehow displeased, whereas prosperity, victory, and progeny were gifts from the gods. The interconnection between the gods, the land, and the people was one that guided the thought and action of those in the ancient Near East. Israel was in some ways a member of the ancient Near Eastern environment. However, God was highly differentiated from the gods of the ancient Near East. As you read the book of Genesis, it is quite difficult to miss the God-land-people connection. The Abrahamic covenant, for example, contains all three elements. God forms a relationship with Abraham, promises that he will make him a great nation, and will establish him in the land of Canaan. He also promises him descendants. Despite this similarity, there are at least three key differences between the ancient Near Eastern gods and the God of Israel. 1. God's unlimited territorial reach. Unlike the gods in the ancient Near East, God is not limited by geographical location. He is the God who created the whole world, flooded the whole world, called Abraham out of the land of Ur, and rescued Israel from Egypt multiple times. God's sovereignty extends well beyond the borders of the promised land. Number 2. God's lack of specialization. While the ancient Near Eastern gods were limited in their capacity to influence all areas of life, the God of Israel is all-powerful. There is no aspect of life outside of his control. Thus, when Israel worships, they need not worship multiple gods, but only the one true God. Number 3. God's communication with humankind. God is not silent like the other ancient Near Eastern gods. Instead, God relates verbally to his people. He helps and guides them as they learn who he is. Through his word, God reveals who he is to his people. He also reveals what it means to live faithfully with him. Scholarship on Genesis and various other Old Testament books often highlights parallels with the ancient Near East. It is surely the case that Israel shares certain similarities with other ancient Near Eastern cultures. As important as the similarities are, the differences between Israel and other ancient Near Eastern nations is important as well. God was not simply another, more powerful ancient Near Eastern deity. Instead, God was the only God, and all other gods were poor facsimiles of the God of Israel. They were fakes. The uniqueness of God and his relationship with Israel, however, was not unintelligible in the ancient Near East. In promising Abraham and the subsequent generations of Israel land, seed, and blessing, God offered something that people at the time would have understood well. In living patiently with a sinful people and remaining loyal despite their disloyalty, God demonstrated his unyielding desire to restore the whole of his creation. The land and the people would have a harmonious relationship with God and benefit from his blessing presence forever. God ultimately accomplished this restoration through the resurrection of Christ for all who believe in him. It is for this final restoration that we wait, even as we participate with God in his ongoing efforts to make all things new.